pattern calls for you to transfer markings to your fabric, this is where you're headed. You're going to use a marking tool in order to take the marks on the pattern, place them on your fabric in a way that you can take the information those marks contain and turn it into stitches. And they come in a lot of different styles. There are three main. So there are pens, which are an ink-based marking tool. There's chalk, which is a chalk-based marking tool, and then there are pressure tools. Pens are the most obvious and familiar, I guess. It can be a pen or a pencil. Sometimes it's a pencil marking tool that you have to sharpen. Other times it can be a water erasable or a heat erasable marking pen. Sometimes it's a permanent ink pen. All of these have one thing in common, and that's that they have a fine tip that leaves behind some sort of ink or lead on the actual fabric. The difference primarily between pencils and pens is that the pencil is harder to remove. Sometimes it has to be laundered to take it out. Obviously with these different pens, water erasable, air soluble, heat erasable, each of those can be removed using that different intermediary in order to take it off your fabric. A lot of people like pencils and pens because they feel familiar in your hand, and it's not a new skill to learn in order to operate with this as a marking tool. So let's say I'm working on a garment and I need to add the lines for a bust dart so that I can bring those lines together and stitch on top of them. Having something with a fine tip that's very accurate but also familiar makes it easier to acquire the skill of sewing a good dart, because I don't also have to learn how to use the tool. So pencils and pens are always a great option. The next one it feels familiar or can be made to feel familiar is a chalk-based tool. Now I don't actually have a real tailor's chalk here. Those usually come in a triangle or a rectangle that's literally a piece of pressed chalk. It's not like chalkboard chalk. It's pressed and it has a sharp edge that can also be honed so that you can get a nice line. These tools are also made with chalk, but they operate differently. This one has like a little chalk cartridge in it that can come out, when it's not broken, that can come out and be replaced as the chalk wears down. And the chalk can be done in different colors so that you always work with a contrasting color to the fabric. So this is white chalk. I would use this on dark fabrics, and then I would use a dark chalk on light fabrics. This particular one is from a brand called Clover, and it has like a little metal wheel with teeth in the tip and then powdered chalk inside, so that when you rub it across the fabric, it actually leaves behind a trace line of chalk, a very thin line of chalk behind it. Now, when you work with like actual chalk, so my grandmother, who learned to sew, in the 30s, for a marking pencil, she would use a pencil. For chalk, she would use a piece of chalk. Very like Depression era mindset there. The problem with those is that they weren't, pencil's really hard to get out of fabric. Chalkboard chalk is kind of fat, and so the lines aren't super accurate. So tools like this have been created so that chalk, which is very easy to remove, can be used on fabric, but in a way that the lines are much more accurate because they're finer. My favorite tool is this one right here. Of all these tools, and obviously I didn't even look hard for these. This is just like what's on the table. This is my very, very favorite because I feel like it has the thinnest, most accurate line, but it's also very easy to remove. And the cartridges do come in different colors, which I love. Now the third option are pressure marking tools. So if this is ink or lead and this is chalk, these make their mark on your fabric using pressure. So this particular one is a tracing wheel, which can be used either on the fabric itself or on paper with carbon tracing paper in between. So really this particular tool, and there's always a tracing wheel in like every starter sewing kit, is designed so that you can have a piece of fabric that you're planning to sew with, and then you put a piece of carbon tracing paper on top, and then you lay your paper pattern on top of that, and you literally trace the lines of the sewing pattern over the carbon paper onto the fabric. And that way the pattern lines from the pattern are transferred to the fabric. The other thing you can use with a tracing wheel is you can literally press it into your fabric and make a line, a nice visible line in the fabric. Doesn't leave any marks behind. It's easy to get rid of that line when you're done with it, but you can leave a physical line in the fabric. The same thing with a Hera marker, which is this. I first met these when I started looking at Japanese sewing tools, and it has a pointed end that you can use for like turning collars or turning points, and a rounded end. And the rounded end is nice because it does the same thing. You can create a line in the fabric just from the pressure of the tool right there in the fabric, but it doesn't actually leave a lasting mark.